Good morning or good afternoon, depending on your location, excellencies, distinguished experts, and dear participants. Welcome to the 12th session of the Trade Policy Dialogue. My name is Miho Shirotori, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. The Trade, Investment, and Innovation Division of the UNSCAP and the Division on International Trade and Commodities of UNCTAD joined hands to facilitate today's debate on trade preferences. We have been great partners for years, and we are delighted to continue our collaboration on trade preferences. The topic of trade preferences is both old and contemporary. It's old. It was over 50 years ago, half a century ago, or in 1971 to be precise, that the Generalized System of Preferences, or GSP schemes, came to life under the aegis of UNCTAD. It has provided lower tariffs for exports of selected developing countries without the need to open their markets to the GSP granting trade partners. And Asia, as a developing region, showcases numerous examples of how trade preferences can lead to substantial export growth. Bangladesh and Cambodia have utilized preferential market access to integrate into the global value chains. And trade preference is also a contemporary issue, especially as the world braces for potential US tariffs and possible retaliation from its trade partners. High tariffs will enhance the value of preferences, as we know, but will this be a strategy that is sustainable for long-term trade-led development? Dear participants, the session today is organized as follows. After opening remarks, UNCTAD will present the key findings of its Trade Preferences Outlook 2024 to set the scene. We then invite the distinguished panelists to share their insights on the questions we have previously posed to them. The participants, you can pose your questions anytime using the Q&A box that you see. We want to address as many questions as possible during the webinar. So, let me invite Ms. Rupa Chanda, the Director of the Trade, Investment and Innovation Division at SCAP, to make her opening remarks. Rupa, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Miho, and a very warm welcome to everyone present here. It's great to be partnering with UNCTAD, of course, continuing our long-standing partnership on a variety of reports and other activities over the years. This is an extremely important topic, as Miho said rightly, both old as well as contemporary. And I think very rightly put in the report that it's time for a rethink, maybe looking at the changing nature of trade and new issues that are coming up. But let me step back a little bit before getting into the heart of the report, which is, to contextualize why is looking at non-reciprocal trade preferences or these kinds of schemes important? Because at the end of the day, they are relevant to the SDGs. If we look specifically at Goal 10, for instance, which is reducing inequality within and among countries, here specifically, we're talking about implementing the principle of special and differential treatment for developing countries, especially least developed countries, in accordance with WTO agreements. And here, within that, proportion of tariff lines applied to imports from least developed countries and developing countries with zero tariffs. So there's a very specific angle here linking it to Sustainable Development Goal 10. Then Goal 17, strengthening the means of implementation and revitalizing global partnership for sustainable development. Again, we are talking specifically about increasing the exports of developing countries with a view to doubling their share in global exports by 2020, of course, past. And within that, developing countries and least developed countries, their share of global exports. So, I mean, if one really goes at a more granular level also within the SDGs, this has a direct bearing. And therefore, it's very important and timely to assess whether these schemes are really making an impact. Do we need to revisit them? Do we need to redesign them, as the report very rightly asks? And I think all of us here know that the effectiveness of these kinds of schemes have gone down over time, and for a variety of reasons. One, because tariffs are not the main means of protection in today's world. Non-tariff measures are on the rise. In fact, there are very interesting charts which show as tariffs have been declining, non-tariff measures. There's almost like a scissor sort of trend between the two. There's the proliferation of RTAs, FTAs, etc., whatever nomenclature you use, and therefore there's been preference erosion. And especially if LDCs are not participants in many of these agreements, then there'll be more of an effect in terms of preference erosion. Third, as I mentioned, is the rise of NTMs and the variety. I mean, earlier we were talking largely about the traditional sort of TBTs, SPS, and so on. Today, if you really look at behind the border regulations, the range and scope of NTMs is so wide. And I think a fourth way, which also the report highlights, is the importance of global value chains. And here one has to look at the way firms are operating across countries, the intra-firm sort of linkages, and the link between FDI and exports is so strong today, and how firms carry out their operations. So therefore, the impact of tariff-related preferences is much less because of the way businesses operate across regions. So given a variety of these reasons, we can go into government procurement policies, competition policies, IP when it comes to technology-related products. Really, the significance of the traditional sort of preferential schemes has to be questioned. So I think in this panel, we're going to really discuss a wide range of things, which is how do we redesign them? Do we look at new issues? Do we look at better targeting of LDCs? If we look at diversification strategies of LDCs, then it goes beyond goods. Then you're looking at services sector. Then that raises a whole range of other kinds of behind the border regulations. So increasingly, if one looks at how to align schemes with emerging trends and issues, then perhaps one has to focus a lot more on NTMs, a lot more on compliance-related costs, administrative procedures, related capacity building, the FDI linkages with trade, intra-firm sort of and inter-firm operations, technology-related issues, and I would say even if you bring in digital trade and e-commerce, a lot of other important issues come up which are not addressed in today's schemes. So I think this is really a great time to explore, brainstorm, and think of how we could have more future-ready sort of preferential schemes. So with that, let me hand over to Luzma. In the interest of time, I really look forward to an insightful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rupa. So I'd like to invite both Luzma de la Mora, who is the Director of the Division on International Trade and Commodities. Luzma, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mijo. Good morning in Geneva and good afternoon in Bangkok. Let me extend my warmest welcome to all of you who are here with us today. Thanks for joining. Well, let me start by thanking Rupa and her team at ESCAP for partnering with us in co-hosting this trade policy dialogue. We are very happy to join forces as two sister UN organizations working in the field of trade and development. So it is always a great pleasure working with ESCAP as we collaborate regularly, and our cooperation has always been excellent. And today's seminar is a testament to that. Well, as you know, UNCTAD, UN Trade and Development, was established in 1964. The creation of UNCTAD responds to the mandate to be the focal point within the UN system for the integrated treatment of trade and development and interrelated issues in the areas of finance, technology, and sustainable development. Throughout our 60 years of history, 6 decades already, UNCTAD's mission has been to foster developing countries' gainful participation in international trade. It is under this overarching goal that UNCTAD adopted Resolution 21 in 1968, paving the way to the emergence of the Generalized System of Preferences. We all know it as the GSP. This was a significant milestone as it opened developing country markets to developing countries' exports in a non-reciprocal way. And I want to underscore the non-reciprocal. ESCAP members have played a major role in this evolution, both as preference granting countries, but also as beneficiary receiving ones. Many in the region such as Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Vietnam, have taken advantage of market access offered under these reciprocal preferential programs. In addition to developed economies in the region that have traditionally offered GSP, several developing economies such as China, India, and Thailand today offer unilateral, non-reciprocal preferential market access for the least developed countries. Export expansion through trade preferences in labor-intensive manufacturing sectors has helped create jobs in those countries with a competitive labor force. In Vietnam, for example, where we will celebrate UNCTAD's 16th Ministerial Conference in October of this year, between 2017 and 2019, the garment, textiles, and footwear sectors employed nearly 5 million workers, and mostly of them women. So after several decades of the implementation of the GSP, at UNCTAD, we have given ourselves the task to explore how effective these trade preferences have been in stimulating developing country exports and what could be improved to maximize their impact on sustainable development and the accomplishment of the Global Development Goals, Sustainable Development Goals, as Rupa already mentioned, including through out-of-the-box policy innovation and new trade and economic cooperation. These are some of the questions that we have tried to address in our recent report, Trade Preferences Outlook 2024, that we will discuss today. We have seen that the trade-stimulating impact of tariff preferences is on a declining trend for several reasons, including preference erosion and the expansion of international trade through integrating in global value chains. Let me share with you that global average MFN and applied rates are only a third of their 1990 levels on account of multilateral tariff reductions following the Uruguay round and the proliferation of FTAs, which has reduced the potential space for preference margins, which is not bad, but again, what is the use of the GSP? While these developed countries may benefit from preferential duty-free treatment, such preferential rates may not offer significant price advantages over their direct competitors, which are often other developing countries receiving similar preferential treatment. This is what we mean by the erosion of tariff preferences. In 16 developed markets, the average effective preference margin between applied rates for LDCs and other developing countries is only 1.3 percentage points, which is marginal. As the sources of today's trade competitiveness are shifting away from competitive labor cost to technology and high-skilled labor, integration in value chain and production networks, services, and foreign direct investment, it may be necessary to develop a new concept or framework of market access cooperation beyond tariffs to bolster developing country exports and enhance their benefits to their economy. For example, expanding production in line with trade preferences would require new investments. So directing outward FDI promotion activities and incentives to preference receiving countries would be instrumental for really maximizing the benefits of preferential trade for the local economy of these countries. So I do hope our discussion today will help us to better understand the current and future state of trade preferences and the potential of new market access cooperation beyond tariffs. As Asia stands at the forefront of global production and preferential trade networks, this discussion is also important for our reflection of how best developing countries may be supported in reaping development gains from trade by successfully navigating an increasingly uncertain trading environment. Let me conclude by thanking once again ESCAP for our excellent cooperation as always, and our speakers for their contributions today. I hope you have a fruitful discussion. Thank you. Mijo, back to you.
Thank you very much, Luzma. I now invite the UNCTAD team to make a brief presentation of the key findings of the Trade Preferences Outlook 2024, and this will set the scene for the panel discussion. May I invite Mr. Taisuke Ito, who is the main author of the report, to introduce the topic. Tai, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Miho. Can you hear me? Good. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thanks for our directors, Rupa and Luzma, for the nice introduction. I think you summarized very well what we discussed. We tried to address in this report. So this is the Trade Preference Outlook 2024, which we prepared last year, and we are happy to launch here today with our SCAP colleagues today. Thanks very much for this opportunity. So let me just go through quickly some of the findings and contents of the report, because we have been working on this topic since some time, and it's a really pleasure to share with you some of the findings, which has been already alluded to by both speakers. So this is just background that has been already mentioned. So this is non-reciprocal tariff preference, by which we mean unilateral market opening by developed countries in principle. So this has started with establishment of GSP in the 1960s and 70s. At the origin, that was the UNCTAD decision, which called for the establishment of these programs. And in the 1970s, there are many developed countries which started to implement this unilateral trade preference schemes. So that was the origin. So at the origin, I think the idea was to promote industrialization of developing countries' economy, because at that time, the major development problem was basically commodity dependence. So they tried to, this was the initiative to try to open markets for manufacturing exports so that developing countries can export and industrialize their economy. So that was the original idea. And then this has been, over the past 50 years, there's been attempts to improve these schemes. Initially, gradually, the focus has been given to LDC. In the 2000, in the concept of WTO discussion, there's been duty-free, quota-free market access initiative. So that's how now the number of markets providing this program has extended to 25. So 16 developed countries provide basically GSP, and plus 9 what we call developing countries market provide special preference program for LDC, specifically for LDC. So that includes China, India, and some other countries. So in terms of reform efforts, there has been some efforts to improve rules of origin in the context of the EU and Canada, and in US, there was AGOA program which tried to provide more facilitating rules of origin. And more recently, one of the notable developments has been this initiative to graduate high-income countries and upper middle-income countries from the beneficiary status of some of those schemes. That has been the case in EU and Canada and the UK. So there's been this evolution. So as my director mentioned, there's been this program has contributed, the mainly export growth and job creation in some of the kind of what we call successful countries, especially in the apparel products and some of those labor-intensive sectors. But as already the directors mentioned, but after 60 years of this existence, there's been some changes, of course, trade structure changes. And as a result, we see that the scope of tariff preference has been shrinking. It becoming very small, thereby making trade preferences less effective and somehow difficult to use for traders. So one of the reasons, as mentioned, has been the preference erosion. Here, on the first graph, we show the gradual decline of MFN tariffs and applied rates because of this WTO Uruguay round market opening, as well as proliferation of regional trade agreements. As a result, today LDC has, on average, have only 5% percentage point of nominal margin, and then only 1% of effective margins, as if you compare the LDC rates with other developing countries market, the rates applied to the other developing countries. So that is the second graph, which shows this difference between nominal margin and effective margin. So that what it means is that LDCs are not really enjoying competitive advantage vis-a-vis their direct competitors, even though they have 5% preference margin if you as compared to MFN rates. So that's one evolution. So preference not becoming has become less impactful, and if you have such a low preference margin, the result is traders stop using preferential type because it's very margin very small. And there are other costs involved in the application of rules of origin and other administrative costs. So that is another implication. And of course, and also Rupa mentioned this, there's an expansion of GBC trade wherein you need to use a lot of imported materials to be able to export to the market. So that means it has become more and more difficult to use this preferential program by complying with rules of origin requirements. And also the contrasting evolution has been the rise of other trade barriers, including NTMs. Not necessarily all NTMs are trade restrictive, but the implication of this proliferation of NTMs and SPS activity standards, and also has been significant, as you see in the upper side graph. This has been the notification to the WTO of SPS and TBT programs standards. So number of NTM measures have been increasing, and also the trade restrictiveness of these measures are also important. It's more trade restrictive than tariffs. That has been shown by some studies. The NTM's at volume equivalent can be double the size of MFN tariff, applied tariff in developed country market. And then on top of that, there's this increasing shifting towards high technology products and FDI, that is becoming more important in the GBC trade, as Rupa mentioned. So here we are showing here just the share of services inputs in the GDP. So we can see the increasing trend of diversification of the economy in terms of national economies, but also this is the case also in terms of trade, because some studies shows the service value added accounts for as much as 40% of total exports globally. So service inputs is becoming very, very important. So this has been the major shift in the international trade structure. So the overall, all in all, the consequence, the result of this evolution has been basically tariff preference has become less impactful, and because it doesn't address emerging source of trade cost or source of competitiveness. So what trade barriers like NTMs are not addressed, and services are other elements are of course not addressed because preference is about tariffs. So this raises kind of two questions for us. So one is how can we improve existing preferential trade programs by trying to improve and modernize some of the preference programs, and that's one question. And the second question is more, if tariffs are becoming less impactful, what can we do to facilitate developed countries to export more in the more the non-tariff areas? So this is what we suggest calling what we may call new market access cooperation. So this is something we want to flag for your attention in this report. So let me start just quickly on the side of how we can improve existing preference programs. So I think here the major difference is, there's big distinction between LDC and non-LDCs. As we saw, there is still some preference margin remaining for LDCs, and the reduction of MFN tariff reduction has been kind of this process has stopped because WTO is not there's no negotiation at this moment, and even one may expect some increase in the MFN tariffs with the new developments. So there may be some scope for improvements. So here we see for LDC, as far as LDC is concerned, but maybe there may be some scope to improve the utilization by improving some rules of origin requirements and facilitating their use. And for other cases, because it of course depends on which program we are talking about, like EU EBA for Everything But the Urban Initiative, for instance, provides very kind of more this comprehensive coverage, whereas some other programs do not necessarily provide the full coverage. So there may be some scope to improve product coverage or apply tariff cuts. But also anyway, I think it is important to kind of improve transparency so that trader can see the opportunities provided under some of those programs. And then one big challenge here is LDC graduation, I think, because some of the successful LDCs like Bangladesh, Cambodia, are going to be graduating from LDC status. So that may mean they may be losing some of the benefits they have been receiving under some of the preference programs. So that's in the case of LDCs. And for non-LDCs, I think the situation is more complicated. I think there's a kind of trade-off between LDC and non-LDCs. So therefore, there's less and less opportunities for LDC, non-LDC countries under these programs, as many of them are transitioning, moving to the FTA. But there may be some opportunity to kind of little bit make adjustment for those countries in special needs. Maybe that including those graduating LDC, for instance, when they move to the non-LDC schemes, there may be some scope to address their needs. And then there are some aspects. One is, of course, in relation to GBC, there is a need to improve some rules of origin reforms. But let me just focus here maybe on the coordination, because I think one of the big issues for the non-reciprocal preferential program is that they are basically the non-coordinated voluntary initiative of individual countries. So there are less efforts to harmonize their different schemes, because the diversity of program means cost for the traders. So in that sense, I think it may be useful to coordinate internationally to see what kind of best practices exist in the application of these programs. And the UNCTAD used to play this kind of role in the 1970s. There used to be the kind of instance which called Special Committee on Preferences, where different developed countries could get together and discuss, how to harmonize the rules of origin, for example. At that time, there was efforts to try to harmonize the rules of origin, but it was not successful. So, but still, I think there's some room for coordination. So this is about the preference program. So let me turn to some of the possible non-market access cooperation. This is something we want to discuss today, and we would like to see what kind of the opportunities may be explored here. So one possibility, of course, is NTMs, which is becoming more and more impacting the trade of developing countries. And it would be nice if we can somehow provide preferential application of NTMs, but we know regulations are meant to be applied on a universal basis. So it is difficult to make a different application of NTMs, and also there may be opportunities for regulatory cooperation, like a harmonization of standards and mutual recognition. But this requires negotiations. Usually, it may be difficult between between countries with different level of development. So that has been challenging. So one big opportunity here we see is that how we can support developing countries' application of this these standards, because complying with developed country standards requires a lot of investment. You need to have a certified laboratory, and then certification cost is can be very significant for small firms. So therefore, also already in WTO agreement, there is a provision which calls for intensified support for such a requirement in case developing countries have difficulty in applying those regulations. So that was the provision in SPS and TBT agreement. So there may be opportunity to explore this capacity building support in terms of NTM. So when it comes to services, also this is a growing area, and there's also opportunity and precedent kind of in the WTO where there's been the LDC service waiver, which was adopted in some time ago, and some developed countries offered preferential, so to speak, market access for some of the service provider and services from LDCs. So there's maybe the possibility to explore this experience and to see how we can expand service trade opportunities for LDCs and if possible for other developing countries. And also services is very the difficult areas, and there are lack of data and so on. So supporting developing countries' regulatory capacities and availability of service data can be instrumental, can help in this initiative. And also there is some FDI. In terms of FDI, you need investment, even if you to really benefit from market access condition in other countries. So the one possibility here we saw in the report is that many developed countries actually provide this, FDI promotional activities for their outbound FDI flows. So they provide some credit guarantees for their firms to be able to invest in other countries to promote internationalization of their firms. So the one idea can be to somehow direct these initiatives and incentives for the firms to invest in developing countries where so that they can take advantage of this new investment to be able to export more to this developed countries. Then in terms of access to technology, this is important because more and more technology is determining factor of export competitiveness. And here, I think in the report we saw in the WTO, there was discussion to provide incentive for in favor of LDC for developed countries to provide incentive to transfer technology for LDCs. So this has been done, but we need to see what else can we do in this context to build product capacity of LDC so they should be able to export more to the other countries. And lastly, and I think that this comes to the heart of the problem because the developing cooperation, this is, I think this captures the core of the essence of the problem because the market access has been provided, but the bottleneck of the developing countries is the lack of supply capacity. So how do we build supply capacity by providing aid for trade to build capacity and also addressing trade finance, which is a very, very important component of international trade today. In the past, in the ACP EU context, there was this, the overall agreement, which is composed of trade and supply capacity building type of arrangement. And today, in today's context, it is not. It may be difficult, but somehow I think we want to see how to make a linkage between this market access opportunities and provision of greater aid for trade and trade finance. Maybe that may be able to as a way to support developing countries export. So let me stop here. Thank you very much for your attention. Back to you, Miho.
Thank you so much, Tai, and the team who prepared the Trade Preferences Outlook. And thank you for highlighting the issues that are very important in considering the future of trade preferences. Now, let me invite our excellent panel. I start with Mr. Excellency, Mr. Mohammad Navid Safillah, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the prestigious Bangladesh Foreign Trade Institute and Additional Secretary at the Ministry of Commerce of Bangladesh. Excellency, it is an honor to have you. Thank you very much. Then we have also a pleasure to have Mr. Pritnam Banerjee. He is the head of the Center for WTO Studies at the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. In addition to his expertise in trade and logistics policy, he may share the view of the private sector on trade preferences based on his experience as a senior official at the Deutsche Post. Mr. Banerjee, thank you very much for joining us today. Ms. Mia Mikic, we all know you and we all appreciate you being here. She's the research associate at the University of Waikato, and we all know former director of the Trade Investment Innovation Division at SCAP. She remains a key advisor to the Asia Pacific Research and Training Network on Trade, ArtNet. Last but not least, we invite Mr. Alexei Kravchenko, who is an Economic Affairs Officer at the Trade Policy and Facilitation section at ESCAP. Distinguished panelists, as Taisuke highlighted in the presentation, we have two questions to pose you so that you can share your insights on. First, do the existing non-reciprocal tariff preferences still address the market access needs of developing countries in Asia today? Second, what do you suggest as new approaches to market access cooperation that could go beyond tariffs and better address market access constraints confronting developing countries in Asia today? I'd like to ask each panelist to keep his or her remarks within 8 minutes. And dear participants, you can add your questions or comments anytime during the sessions using the Q&A box as you see it in the bottom. With this, let me first invite Excellency Mr. Namit Safiullah to take the floor. And Mr. Safiullah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Excellency Mrs. Mino Shirotori, for giving me the floor. Good evening, good afternoon, Bangladesh time. Esteemed discussions from ESCAP, UNCTAD, and Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. It is indeed my honor and privilege to be a part of today's panel discussions. I heartily appreciate the opportunity to express my views regarding market access cooperation issues in today's Trade Policy Dialogue Trade on Preferences Outlook 2024 towards new market access cooperation. Can you hear me properly? Am I audible?
Yes,
okay, thank
yes,
you so
Excellency.
much. Thank you so much. Respected audience, I think we are all aware that as one of the fastest growing economies in the world and the second largest economy in South Asia, Bangladesh has fulfilled all the criteria for graduating from LDCs to a developing country. And hopefully the country will transcend into a developing country by 2026. That will definitely bring with us new challenges and opportunities. Currently, as an LDC, Bangladesh has been enjoying the duty-free, quota-free access, market access facilities, and also GSP facilities in almost all developed countries, and also from many developing countries. Around 70% of Bangladesh's exports are done under the DFQF facilities. However, the non-reciprocal trade preferences like DFQF will not prevail longer when Bangladesh will be graduated from the LDCs. And as a result, our export sector will be the most affected one after losing these preferences. Non-reciprocal trade preferences like DFQ market access and other facilities, as I've just mentioned, have significantly benefited Bangladesh, particularly when it comes to trade, economic growth, and industrial development. The country's RMG sector, which accounts for, you all know that over 80% of our total exports, has flourished due to all these facilities, market access. The report exhibits that most favored nation tariff rates of developed economies have been falling. Non-tariff measures tend to obstruct exports, and regional trade agreements or free trade agreements are enhancing across the globe. Consequently, the impact of NRTPs is likely to be reduced for LDC or developing countries. In this context, free trade agreements can act as catalysts to improve market access for Bangladesh and other LDC countries by reducing or eliminating tariffs and trade barriers. For instance, FTAs can help maintain preferential access for Bangladesh in its export destinations like EU, UK, and USA. It can work as a great instrument and a catalyst to promote our trade, increase our export competitiveness, attract more foreign direct investments, etc. And definitely contribute to the export diversification. You know that Bangladesh is an export-oriented industry. Bangladesh pursues an export-oriented industrialization. And for that reason, our government always emphasizes on export diversification. To encounter the LDC graduation challenges and secure seamless market access, Bangladesh government considers FTAs with prospective trading partners as an instrument to augment the trade and investment momentum of Bangladesh. You will be glad to know that by now, Bangladesh has completed feasibility study regarding the FTAs with almost 31 countries. And Bangladesh has already started its EPA, Economic Partnership Agreement with Japan. On the coming February, we are going to have the 4th round of negotiation, and hopefully the EPA will successfully complete by 2025. And we'll soon begin negotiations with Singapore and South Korea as well. Trade agreements or FTAs can be more than a new paradigm for market access cooperation. Trade agreements often go beyond tariff preferences and focus on eliminating non-tariff barriers. Trade costs of certain non-tariff measures or barriers are estimated to be twice the cost of tariffs and for LDCs or developing countries. NTBs can be critical impediments for coherent market access. Trade agreements help rationalize and harmonize non-tariff measures like sanitary and phytosanitary, technical barriers to trade, which we call TBT in short, complex customs procedures, subsidies and domestic support to local industries, etc. RTFTAs can also integrate. LDC or developing countries like Bangladesh in global value chain, fostering product and markets has been fostering product and market diversification opportunities. Another crucial aspect of trade agreements or FTAs includes facilitating market access cooperation, and FTAs promote mutual capacity building activities in reducing or eliminating non-tariff barriers, ensuring transparency, fostering technical assistance, and improving overall trade environment or scenario. They are now elevated towards economic partnership agreements or comprehensive economic partnership agreements, which include investments as a part of the agreement. Investment provisions in RTAs or FTAs can increase, as I have told earlier, foreign direct investment. It can also foster technology transfer and enhance compliance capacity for LDCs and developing country members. As a new paradigm for market access cooperation, RTAs or FTAs can promote sustainable development by integrating economic growth, environmental protection, and social progress into trade policies. Many modern RTAs, FTAs now include sustainability chapters that ensure trade benefits which are aligned with long-term development goals. So these were all the points which I wanted to share with you as a panel discussion. I would like to conclude my speech here. Thank you so much. Thank you for your patient hearing.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Thank you very much for sharing the idea that, sort of for the future of having better way to address the market constraints using the EPAs or comprehensive EPAs to address these issues, exactly that we were talking about, NTMs, foreign direct investments, and possibly services. And this is a very interesting thing. And if the feasibility studies are available to public, we'll be very interested to read that as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I'd like to invite Mr. Banerjee of the Center for WTO Studies at the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. Mr. Banerjee, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I hope I'm audible. I would like to start by thanking ESCAP for having me here, and a warm greeting to all my esteemed fellow panelists and other colleagues in this meeting. In the allocated time, I would like to start off by saying that, where my esteemed colleague from Bangladesh left off, FTAs and the proliferation of FTAs have actually led to relative preference erosion, because as increasingly countries give FTA preferential rates, it means that the GSP rates are now competing with whatever preferential rates have extended across the board. This is especially true for countries which have high applied MFN tariffs like India, whereby the preferences are meaningful. In many cases, the autonomous regime of applied MFN rates might be close to zero, so you're not really gaining something having a preferential access. But in this case, in these instances, you do. I would also like to bring on the table the fact that we live in very uncertain times. It was mentioned by initial speaker, and we are seeing increases in tariffs across the board, even in countries which have typically have had low tariffs in their autonomous regime. I'll come to more of that later. The other flag that I would like to raise is on rules of origin. This has also been mentioned. Complicated rules of origin impede against GVC integration. It impedes against anyway the cost of doing trade for especially LDC exporters, many of whom tend to be MSMEs. But there's an added dark shadow in the horizon. Just prior to the elections in the US, Congressman Arrington, who is a Republican from Texas, has introduced new legislation. It's called Axing Non-Market Tariff Evasion Act. Of course, it is just a legislation at this point in time, but given the fact that the Republicans control both the House and the Senate, and we have a Republican president in the White House, it might see the light of day. What essentially it does is that it upends the standard operating procedure of rules of origin, which was based either on some kind of a transformation of the product or value addition. Essentially, what legislation says is that if the product is manufactured in a facility that is either owned or controlled by a country that is seen to be inimical to US economic interests, then that particular product will not qualify for any trade agreement benefits. In other words, for example, if a country has GSP-related preferences or even FTA-related preferences in a factory which is owned by a country which the US perceives as inimical to its interests, it will not even be qualifying for those benefits. So it's nothing to do with value addition or meeting the rules of origin requirements. Simply the factory ownership is what disqualifies you. As was pointed out, the AGOA was one good attempt to try and simplify the issue of traditional rules of origin. Didn't go that far as it should have. But there's also other issues on the horizon that I would like to put to this audience. One, that global trade, if we look at the basket of global trade and we see which are the products that are tending to dominate in terms of value, in that case, we are seeing concentration across 6 or 7 HS chapters, as we call them. You have chapter 85, electronics, chapter 84, engineering goods, 87, automobiles, a host of chapters related to chemicals, products, etc. In terms of value over a period of time, they're already 55%. One would imagine they'll become 2/3 to 70% in the future. And if I look at the lines where typically countries tend to give GSP benefits, many of those chapters, you don't have too much of commitments in GSP. So that's one thing. Also, you are now having industrial policy come up by very large countries, where in a very odd situation, typically expansive industrial policy was the prerogative of the, what we used to call the late industrializer who was trying to catch up. You have now a situation where the top 3 manufacturing superpowers, European Union, US, and China, have the biggest budgets for industrial policy. So, and they are the sectors they're targeting are again in these chapters that I had just mentioned. And of course, we know that the tariff wars that we are seeing are also associated in these same sectors. So you are creating an ecosystem where especially LDCs are going to be perhaps left out of the production networks in the very sectors where global trade is growing and be consigned to producing lower end, low value products, which brings us to the whole issue of non-tariff measures, which is the other thing that was flagged. From a business perspective, a measure does not become a barrier till the time it is too complex and too expensive for an exporter to comply with it. So what does that really mean? In the case of LDCs, one is, of course, the issue of capacity building, which Ito-san, I think, mentioned very clearly. And there's, of course, a relative cost, because in many cases, the mandated institutions that can do the compliance for you will not have a location in your country. When if they do, those services will be offered, pursue that. But more importantly, we have seen a proliferation of standards which do not adhere to the global standard. There's an international standard, maybe ISO or OIE, but the standard that, the technical regulation that the country is following has a significant deviation. What does that translate at the ground level for the businesses? It means that for every different export market, the exporter will then have to tweak their assembly line to meet that specific country's requirements. It mitigates against economies of scale. It mitigates against economies of scale of production, which is a massive cost, especially if you're MSME. So that's another big challenge, this deviation from international standards without much explanation why such deviation is even required to meet the requirements of the regulation. Lastly, when we come to services, I would like to remind this audience that the autonomous regulation in services, the as is, typically is quite liberal in mode one and associated with tourism across most markets. So even if there are no commitments in terms of large developing countries or developed countries, might not be commitments in the GATS or elsewhere in agreements, the autonomous regime is liberal. So nothing prevents countries from participating in this economy. Of course, a binding commitment brings in certainty, etc., of investment. I think what was referred to by our colleague Ito-san, I think two aspects. One is the facilitation, where I think there is a lot to be done. How do you help some of these LDCs in developing countries access those markets better? The existing openness is there. How do you help them access and take advantage of those markets? And I think in mode 4, not much has happened in FTAs. And that's mine. I'd like to kind of put a red flag in front of my esteemed colleague from Bangladesh. A lot of the interest from LDCs in mode 4, movement of people, this surplus labor. And I think the political situation we are seeing now is going to even get worse. So FTAs have not really addressed that issue, and it's probably going to get worse. That is also true for NTMs. Again, I would like to, present this to our previous speaker, that if you look at most, and there's a very good study by the deep trade agreements of the World Bank. If you look at their TBT and SPS chapters, it comes out very clearly that one area where deep commitments across a vast array of FTAs, including FTAs where advanced countries like the European Union or US have participated in SPS, TBT, and NTM issues, the depth of commitments and what it needs to be done has not been achieved through FTAs. Last point before I have the two business development issues to come in is on, again, I would like to caution our colleagues in developing countries and LDCs on the whole sustainability agenda in FTAs. Please be mindful, please be careful what you wish for, because some of those very disciplines in those chapters might mitigate against investment, against industrial expansion. It might require you to bring in regulations that will increase costs to a point that you cease to be competitive. So it requires a lot of negotiating technical capability to address issues of NTMs, services facilitation, and what we call the new issues in trade related to sustainability. And I don't think right now most developing countries, forget LDCs, have that. I'm being very blunt, and forgive me for being so. Lastly, I think Ito-san made two very important points which I think are low-hanging fruits operationally and from a business perspective. One is on the guarantees for investment. We have heard a lot of African leaders of late mention the point that if countries, especially LDCs, are going to get integrated into global value chain. So what they need is not so much tariff liberalization, which often exists in many cases, especially in some of the lower, areas such as textiles, etc., where GSP benefits are already there. What they need is the investment to come in to help them upgrade the manufacturing, the technology, which is not happening. So if developed countries' agencies were more aggressive in providing investment guarantees, it might create an ecosystem where their manufacturers can move some of that to these locations and start these activities. The second one, I think, goes back to capacity building, and there are two aspects. Trade promotion is a complicated and expensive exercise, and a lot of smaller developing countries in LDC simply do not have the wherewithal or the budget to do this in an expansive way in their targeted markets. So a great, capacity building and, aid for trade would be that developed country or, advanced country trade promotion bodies, which are very good at doing this, assist their counterparts in LDCs and developing countries. And agencies like KOTRA in Korea, which are well known for their best practices in our own region, could perhaps launch such schemes. We have our ITPO in India as well, which does a pretty decent job, right? So the last part is on the FTA. So if we are going to accept, as our previous speaker said, that FTAs are perhaps now the best way forward, and we can debate whether that is true or not. But if that is accepted as something, well, I would argue that even for FTA negotiations, because now we are, it's no more about tariffs as was mentioned. Now the chapters are NTMs, services, it's all behind the border regulations, sustainability. These require a lot of capacity building and development, where I think for LDC and other smaller developing countries to become effective participants in negotiations, especially with the markets that they want to have these FTAs with, which are typically larger developing countries or industrialist economies, this capacity building needs to be done. I am very happy to say that our center does a lot of this work in our region and outside, and it has been something that is demand-led. So, countries actually come to us with very specific demands that we need negotiation capacity building in these areas. But perhaps a network, either through ESCAP or through the good agencies of UN, of 10, 12 such institutions like us who can provide this kind of support would be considered. We have our Honorable Prime Minister has launched the Voice of the Global South, which is a mandate to especially kind of meet this demand from the LDCs and developing countries. So I'll end there. I know I ran over time. I apologize for that. Thank you for your patience, and thank you so much for having me here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Banerjee, and thank you for highlighting that the reality, the market reality in terms of like increasing the rise of industrial policy among rich countries, the rise of sustainability related factors, for example, voluntary sustainability standards, which are market standards and private standards, and how they actually combined, how they actually counter the seeming advantage that trade preferences are supposed to give. But also you mentioned about the reality on the current GSP schemes, that there may be a huge mismatch between the products that countries actually provide preferences and the products that receiving countries could probably benefit. And these were extremely valuable statements and insights. Thank you very much. Thank you. I now invite Ms. Mia Mikic, to share her insights. Mia, you can take the floor.
Thank you very much, Miho. I'll try to be brief. Of course, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this wonderful panel, and thank you, Ito-san, for a great summary of this very good publication. I don't think I can add much to what was already said by my predecessor speakers and by the ladies that provided excellent opening remarks. But I'll try to focus on certain aspects of these two questions that strike me as very important. And so the question one about effectiveness of the scheme, and when I talk about effectiveness, I'm looking at the impact on development. All right. And so the question becomes of whether these schemes were utilized to develop development that is stable and inclusive, and of course adheres to the principles of sustainable development, right? And of course it didn't. And the question is why? And we have, the publication goes into many factors of why this did not happen. I think what I lacked being more put out there up front was really the capacity lacking of countries to supply per the market access. Because you can remove all the barriers, but if you don't have sustained capacity to deliver at the same quality, and in particular in the value added lines of the production, then of course you won't be able to move your development along the development spectrum, right? So that's one thing that I would go into a little bit more, if I may, later. But also, I think we need to look into MFN availability to all the countries, right? The WTO just published a paper, I think, a week ago or 2 weeks ago on the use of MFN, right? And according to the calculations there, I did not read it thoroughly, so maybe I'm mistaken, but 80% of trade globally is done under MFN treatment. Out of that, 53% is at 0 MFN rates, right? And only 17% of trade is done under the preferential terms, and they are being taken together under the FTA preferences and preferential trade arrangements that we are considering today, right? So there is a very thin sliver of preferences that can be used, right? And then you need to look, and I don't think that has been made explicit, is you have an access. I mean, it was said by everyone, global value chains are the mode of production that we have today. They are present in all sectors of the economy, industry, agriculture, services, etc., right? Now, if you have preferences on the export side, on the access side, right, but you don't have equivalent preferences to importers that have to import various parts and components, and they have to pay high cost for these imported parts and components, then you, of course, have no ability to be price competitive. I mean, you don't need to have a very complicated calculations to look at that, right? So we need to align the tariff reforms on the export and import side in order to actually be able to move along into these value chains. It's one element only. It's not the magic bullet, but it's one element only, right? I also would like to, but I'm aware of the time. And sorry, I have to use my little notes here so that I don't forget the important things that I wanted to mention. I think what was said already is that non-tariff measures are not aligned with the specialization or the ability of developing countries supply, and through SPS, TBT, but also others in terms of licensing, IP, adherence, etc., etc. And I wanted to combine this with the second question of what you posed, Miho, is, you know, how do we move forward there? So in order how to move forward, we need to understand development and role of trade in development. Just to trade more is not going to deliver what we want, right? We need to improve the quality of trade, right? We need to make it more diversified. We need to make it more inclusive. We need to make it more sustainable, right? And in order to do that, we really need to look at where the people in the poor countries or low-income countries work, right? And when you look at where they work, there is you know, there are various statistics, but where they work, on average in low-income countries, almost 50% is in services, right? or 40%, sorry, 50% is maybe in agriculture, 11% is in industry, right? And so if you base the progress only on that small sector, right, and do nothing in the other ones, right, because NTMs are not really looking into agriculture, and of course there is nothing done on services, then you will not be getting impact. So my look forward, and also I have to say that if we look at the quality of growth, right, we need to also be honest and say that use of preferences have caused quite high concentration in terms of production, concentration in terms of actually capture of benefits of trade that have not been spread across the economy in all of these countries, right? And yes, this is a combination of internal and external factors, but we are talking about how do we use trade here, preferential trade or in whichever way, reciprocal or not, for development, then we have to actually look into all these factors. So how do we actually make trade more beneficial? How do we increase sectoral differentiation, etc.? You look what is growing the fastest, and it is services and all types of services. But most importantly, it's not the final services. It is intermediate services that contribute to the efficiency and productivity growth, right? And so if we look at how to do then increase of those activities in low-income countries, then yes, we need to actually build capacity. We need to increase investment. Aid for trade, Pritam, I agree totally with you, right? Aid for trade is a great instrument. It has created quite a few significant sort of cases in Asia in particular and in Africa. But it needs to be a collaboration and cooperation between investors and the countries receiving it, right? And so let me stop there because I see you are looking at the clock as well, Miho. And if I may then just one more thing. I'm wearing a badge of Women for Trade or Trade for Women, and I think services as well. A fantastic sector that can provide a sort of an impetus for the more gender balanced growth, right? So just to add that as well. Thank you very much for patience, Miho.
Thank you very much, Mia. I mean, you really nicely put them together. That the important thing is basically that whatever the trade preferences, but more broadly, trade market access cooperation should be aligned with the long-term sustainable development aspiration of developing countries. And that is very, very important, I think. Also, you mentioned it's a very important thing that the GSP is not only the great thing. I mean, as you said, it probably contributed to the concentration of those exporting countries in the low value added, highly NTM sensitive sectors. That is something that we also have to have a realistic assessment of that. But thank you very much, Mia. Now I would like to invite Mr. Kavchenko to share some analytical insights. I think you're going to share something from the ongoing work at ESCAP in developing a trade negotiating analysis tool. Tina, probably. Alexei, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Miho, and thank you, UNCTAD, for organizing this and inviting me. Thank you, Ibro and Tai, and thank you all the panelists who came before me. So just really quickly, I'll jump into it with your permission. I'll share my screen. I hope you can see it. Yep. Okay, so what I'm going to show you today is called Tina, a Trade Intelligence and Negotiation Advisor. So the work on this started actually back in 2017, 2018. Well, Mia was still our director here. And so the idea behind TINA was to automate many of the analytical work done as part of trade agreement negotiations, particularly feasibility study or impact assessment. Because trade negotiators in Asia and the Pacific and beyond, they do exactly the same thing with the same numbers, just choose and pick different countries. And so we try to facilitate that. And let me give you an example of what it looks like now. Actually, this tool has a lot of functionalities. I'm going to skip through most of them to show you the highlights to give you a taste. If you are interested, please reach out. Very happy to do demonstrations for you and your teams. Anyway, so let me start with India. So I'm negotiating as part of India, and I want to negotiate, let's say, a free trade agreement with the European Union, a true case study. So selecting the potential trade partners, and the first thing you can see, like the normal statistics you would see in any feasibility study or impact assessment. So you can see how much they trade with each other, what they import, what are the top products, just basic statistics that you would need as the beginning to start this analysis, right? But the interesting part comes with the creation of the negotiation list, right? So this is the list of products which India should have on the table when they're going to the European Union and trying to get concessions from them, right? So what qualifies this product to be on the list? Well, it should be something that EU already imports from anyone. It should be something that India exports already. It should have a non-zero tariff. It should have a comparative advantage. India should have comparative advantage of that. And if you're interested, you might prioritize certain sustainability-related product lists like the environmental goods list or plastic substitutes. But I'll just leave the filters by default. And here, Tina gets the trade data and tariff data, calculates the indices, and voila, here you have 1,212 products that satisfy the conditions of that filter. So much more manageable than 5,200 something products at HS6 digital level that you started with. Okay, and here you have this list. You can go ahead and click on any of these lists, any of the products to get more information for each of them. And I should mention that all of these features were developed in consultation with current and former members of negotiating teams. For example, our colleague here who worked for a negotiating team in India, he said, well, we look at the time series. So we added the time series and you can see how it's been changed. But he also said, well, what about the competitors who send the same product to Europe? And you can see straight away it's Saudi, Kuwait, UAE, and US selling the same one product, which is this petroleum oils. You can see also that right now it gets 0% tariff at the GSP rates, but also EU has signed a whole lot of trade agreements and giving always 0% tariff preference to this particular product. So chances are, if India were going to ask for a 0% tariff on this product, because they've given it to so many countries under different trade agreements, they'll be open to doing this as well. So that's just the product level information. And we've teamed up with UNCTAD and Global Trade Alert and WTO and created links to various NTMs. So you can see on their own website that are imposed by the European Union on India for this particular product 271019. And you can see them here. It'll take a little bit longer, but you'll see if there's any notifications. Nothing from the WTO, something from Global Trade Alert, and all the stuff that EU puts in terms of non-tariff measures that are imposed on India and everybody else. The last part on the bottom here I wanted to add is the GSP utilization rate. So this is the underlying data set of the report, I suppose, that's been here launched here, and you can see again European Union India, the beneficiary group, and you can see the GSP utilization rates. So if you select, for example, an LDC like Bangladesh, you'll see the GSP utilization rate as well, but there's not much trade coming out for this particular product. This gives you the product list. You can also select all these products and run a tariff liberalization model using partial equilibrium. So we can see whatever the existing tariffs are, move them to 0 or any other number that you like, and then submit and simulate. And this will run a partial equilibrium model telling you what's the benefit of having a free trade agreement between EU and India, and you can see straight away there's a massive potential for increase in trade up to the point of $3.77 billion, or about 5% of their current trade between EU and India. We've also recently added an NTM modules, which is just like this negotiation tariff simulation, except that instead of tariffs, we use the ad valorem equivalents of NTMs, and you can select the AVs that we've calculated or by key Nichita. And this will also run this, give you a negotiation list, as well as the partial equilibrium simulation of removing them perhaps through certain provisions in trade agreements. Now, going back, instead of selecting India, I'll select now an LDC, and I'll go to Bangladesh because it was actually from the request of Bangladesh, actually from the Bangladesh Foreign Trade Institute, that we've added this particular feature. Because if we're going to run the same analysis for Bangladesh and India, the partial equilibrium is not going to actually show you a lot, because right now Bangladesh gets these preferences, unilateral preferences from India under their own preference schemes, as well as an LDC under SAFTA. So there is no decrease in tariffs because they're already at 0. But Bangladesh is interested in doing that because they're graduating, which means they will face higher tariffs unless they get other preferences. So what we've added is this simulate preference loss module, where we list all the agreements or preferences that Bangladesh receives from everyone. And you can see this is a list of all these different preferences. And just to keep it short, I'll select anything that has the word LDC in it, the acronym LDC, and I will submit and simulate this. And so what this does is it looks at the current tariffs faced by Bangladeshi exports to India, and if it has anything to do with LDC, it removes it and substitutes it with the next lowest tariff, whether it's from a trade agreement or MFN or balance rate, so the next lowest one. So it'll take a little bit of time because this is quite a lot of data there. It's not just the trade between India and Bangladesh, it's also essentially every other trade in these products that are being affected. So it does quite a lot of heavy lifting, but you know, the work that has been previously done by expensive consultants over a period of a few months, if not more, it can now be done in a matter of minutes, much less if I stop talking.
Alex, there was a question from Brian, I think, if the TINA include a country like Kenya.
Yes,
or
it
is
does.
it only for African countries, Asian countries? It does. Yeah.
It's global. In fact, we've partnered up with the Economic Commission for Africa. We'll be launching an African TINA course later this year. And there is a bit of a delay because we have to translate this whole site into French as well. But yes, Kenyan data is already there. Now, just to show you the impact, so this is a partial equilibrium model, so it's quite restrictive, but it shows you the markets, helps you to identify the markets which should be a priority for Bangladesh trade negotiations, which includes EU, Canada, UK, and India. So what this does means if you don't negotiate trade agreements, once you graduate, you lose those LDC preferences. This is the markets that will be impacted the most here. So this is TINA analytical trade data. What we've launched last year as well is the sister site called Legal TINA, because as trade negotiators, they go beyond looking at just tariffs. There's also, of course, the legal text of trade agreements. So here, the setup a little bit different, but we can see it's still work in progress, so we haven't officially launched it yet. You can see, but basically for any of these topics, upon consultation with lawyers, we came up with this capacity building, essentially textbooks, like what do you need to know about TBTs, how is it typically incorporated in RTAs, and so forth. So as this part. The cool part is here's the RTA text search. So we've collected data so far of 513 RTA text agreements and 19 WTO treaties, including SPS agreement, TBT agreements, and so forth, and we can search through them. So if I, for example, search for something LDC, it will show you all the instances in trade agreements where LDC has been mentioned. So you can see here special needs and concern of ESA LDCs will be taken into account, and you can basically search and see where it's been mentioned. You can see if there's been a trend. So you can see LDC has been mentioned only since about 2006. Before it hasn't actually been mentioned before. Now I'm not a lawyer, I'm an economist, so I'm reading this. It's a bit hard to process. So we've added the large language model capability here. So again, it's not a lawyer, it's a model. And it will take this and explain this provision in simple terms. And these cues have been given to us by every time we do any sort of capacity building, lawyers come along and they basically do the same thing. And I'm sorry, my internet is a little bit slow here, or LLM model is overload, but yeah, there you go. It explains you what this means in simple terms, and you can ask more questions like give a hypothetical example, what are the implications of this provision, and so forth. Again, these cues have been suggested by lawyers and when they actually go through trade agreements and look at the text and typically answer these questions like what does it mean? Give me an example, and so forth. And you can get this information here. Another thing that we have done, and
sorry,
this is
Alex, I don't want to, sorry, stop you, but we only have 7 minutes remaining. We also have questions came from the participants. No doubt that TINA is extremely useful, and perhaps you can give people on where to go to get like a link to get more information on the TINA, please, at this stage. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I will leave it there. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'll share the links in the chat.
Thank you very much. Now, thank you so much, the excellencies and the distinguished panels. We have 3 questions. Let me just read them from the beginning. The first one, which says, in 2025, decoupling is more sharpening and trade tensions become highly global. Is there any multilateral anticipation efforts by UN and WTO to overcome what will happen this year? Second question, I wonder what are the systemic challenges developing and LDCs are facing in the process of maximizing opportunities in participating in trade agreements and global trade systems? How currently they solve those challenges, if there's any? Thank you very much. For this question, the latter part, I think what you just mentioned, Alexei, on TINA is definitely a very useful tool to increase this negotiating capacity and knowledge of developing countries in trade agreements. Also, UNCTAD is providing, in 1 month's time, online training course on the trade negotiating techniques. And we will give you, all the participants, in the different links to get more information on that. Now, the third question says, I would like to hear more about the capacity building support to media, MSMEs not only in the area of lowering certification cost, but in all ramifications, especially in promoting their effectiveness in the participation in regional and global value chains. Now, with the 5 minutes remaining, may I ask each of the panelists to either pick up one or address all the things, to share your views vis-a-vis these questions, and we can take it as your final word as well. So if it's all right, if it is acceptable with you, I'd like to start with the Excellency Mr. Mohammed Navid Shafileh to address to these questions. Thank you very much.
May I request you to repeat the questions once again so that I can try to
Perhaps
answer.
the question that was, the first one was, there's a growing trade conflicts in the international market. Should there be some sort of the multilateral actions to tame that kind of situation? The second question was how developing countries and LDCs be better capacitated in having trade agreements. And number 3 was about what would be the effective support to build the capacities of micro, small, medium enterprises in meeting today's market requirements like standards and compliance costs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Regarding the first question, I think that when multiple questions or multiple critical situations arise, then there is one multilateral, organization, WTO. WTO may intervene during that time when there is trade conflicts between more than 2 countries. Then I think WTO can intervene to give the solution. To me, I think that is the answer from my side for the question number 1. And definitely, if we go for the FTAs or other agreements, trade agreements, there is no option other than building the capacity. Capacity building is very much required, essential to develop the necessary skills so that those who are involved with the procedure, whole process, they can negotiate efficiently and come up with, probable solutions to the problems. And at the same time, I would also simultaneously, I would add one more thing, that is there should be more research and development, and at the same time, innovation for each country so that they can more efficiently negotiate and come to a win-win situation between the negotiating countries. And there should be also a pool of experts, trade negotiation experts, so that they can tackle the situation more effectively and efficiently. So thank you so much. That's all from my side.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask Mr. Banerjee for your inputs. Thank you.
So thank you very much again. And the second and third questions I'll quickly address. On the systemic challenges, I think the capacity building for both trade promotion and trade negotiation are the key areas. While I fully take on board that agencies like the UN are doing a sterling job in that area, in many cases, developing country experience counts. So, in that case, large developing countries like India, Brazil, etc., who have gone through this process for some time, their institutions can play a critical role either in partnership with UN agencies or independently, which our center does in many ways. On the second issues on how we can effectively kind of address the constraints of meeting the market needs, I think I'll again reiterate the investment facilitation, having investment coming into the LDCs, because the spillover effects of that manufacturing base teaches the skills, it broad bases those skills, whether it's packaging, meeting, SPS or TBT requirements in target markets, all of that, the spillover is tremendous. And we have seen this historically happen. But the second a quick point I would like to make there is in terms of, again, what I said, a lot of the large developing countries, especially countries like Korea, who have spent 3 decades going through this development trajectory, they have institutions that really have customized solutions that only offer to their own firms. But if as an aid for trade, which is not so expensive in terms of the budget, Kotra became associated with helping firms in LDCs, where they could do a lot of this activity. I think it'll go a long way because these countries don't have the depth of institutional capacity to do a lot of these work. So I think these are low-hanging fruits which we could consider. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Banerjee. I'd like to invite Mia for your response to the questions.
Okay, I'm not gonna try to answer question 1. I think, Miho, you are better positioned to talk about that. But in terms of systemic problems for developing countries, in particular low-cost, low-income countries, I think, yes, the issue is capacity, as I also talked earlier. But the big problem is also, do they have market that is attractive to invite partners to negotiate with them, right? And so I think domestic sort of, the look at domestic policies and how they align their sort of long-term strategies as well with regional prospects can help to make them more attractive for other countries that would like to negotiate and perhaps provide this reciprocal, even though if asymmetric, access to the markets. And of course, then all this, what was said about capacity building in terms of negotiation. And I would want to add that you need quality data to be able to support policymaking. And there is lots of problems with data in these countries. So money needs to follow where it needs to provide the impact. Whoever is making decisions on where the money is spent in statistics offices needs to understand that, right? And so that's a big problem. In terms of MSMEs, yes, you know, how to make them be more helped by regional and other agreements. I think it is, again, the lots of the barriers for these are domestic. All right. And so obviously these can be sorted out by deep FTAs much more than by unilateral preferences, right? That would force the removal of regulatory barriers that exist, or even tariffs that exist locally, and allow these firms then to enter the markets at a lower cost. So I would think that, and then also working on mutual recognition agreements for the standards and for other NTMs, look at the simplification of rules of origin, and then of course putting e-certification and digitalization of all the processes of everything else. So I think that would go a long way towards helping small companies, particularly women-led. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Mia. And Alexei, do you have a final word?
If you want any more information on Tina, please reach out. But I just wanted to quickly add 2 cents on the global efforts to facilitate trade in these challenging times. One thing that I'd like to highlight is that SCAP, we have the framework agreement on cross-border paperless trade that encourages countries to facilitate trade essentially. And our research shows that this can reduce trade costs from 10 to 30%, depending on individual countries. And this will go a long way to addressing non-tariff measures. In fact, most of the cost is not actually the measures themselves, but how easy it is for countries to deal with them. And those who have good trade facilitation implementation report much lower trade costs. And through this agreement, countries may effectively be able to achieve that. I'll share the link in the details as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very important point. Now, this brings us to the end of this session where we really enjoyed a very rich discussion on this topic. Thank you very much to all the panelists. And also I'd like to thank the SCAP team and also the UNCTAD team, Taisuke, Ebru, Mesut, and Federico, and of course Cecilia, who actually did everything to make this webinar come true. Thank you very much. But after all, dear participants, thank you very much for your active participation. You're gonna get all the report, if you like, at the end with the questions and the chat, and all the links will be, we're going to put them together and share it with you in another part. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
We hope to continue working with you again. Thank you.
We
The
would deeply
meeting is
appreciate if
closed.
the report or the proceedings of today's online meeting could be
There will be a
provided.
short report, yes.
That will enrich our knowledge.
Yes, that will be good.
Thank you so
All
much.
right. Thank you
Thank you
very
all.
much. Thank you. Thank you
Bye.
very much. Bye.
Okay.
Meeting is
Bye.
closed.
Thank you.
Thank you.